distinction with the way we're using hip-hop in this exhibition, that we're specifically focusing on political or conscious hip-hop. That is to say, hip-hop that is about empowerment, rather than about being cool, about being about drugs, or really we have been using conscious hip-hop as a starting point. So the way that hip-hop is used in Native communities and also other sort of marginal communities around the world, it's really a global phenomenon where hip-hop is taken up to speak about injustice, to speak about politics, to speak about language in a way for younger generations. So we make a very strong distinction about what kind of hip-hop we're referring to. With references to their own cultures, to their own cultural traditions. This is a really good
Tanisikiwa, Nimiyoyan, Shinikashum Dylan, Nimishum Tepwash Mitchif, Nimishum Tepwash Otepamisiwa, Jipanatan Panatangashin, Drummond Island, Red River, Slave Lake, Alberta, Julius Enfant de Awawak, Nindatoshka, Michigan State University, Minakawa Pamitan. So the project I have here as part of Beat Nation is a project called Anishinaabensa Beamscoebshkigiwab, which is in the Anishinaabe Mwin language or the Ojibwe language means Native Kids Ride Bikes. And it's a socially engaged project I've been engaged on for 3 years, where I collaborate primarily with urban Native youth, and we put together lowrider bicycles, which are based on the teachings of the elders. So oftentimes we'll integrate and bring in fluent speaking elders. In my community, the urban Native community in Lansing, Michigan, we have the largest number of fluent Anishinaabe Mwin speakers of anywhere, any urban space, any off-reserve space in the US. And so the bike project becomes a way for us to collaborate, for me to gather youth, some of whom have direct connections to their reserve community. Some are 1, 2, 3 generations removed from the reserve community. And so we get conversations between elders, between youth, between young Native adults, and start thinking about things such as migration, right? The bike becomes a way to think about migration, sustainable forms of transportation, traditional stories, all of these things, healthy living, all of these things become manifest in the bicycles themselves.
And you can see Sunny here uses a very stylized form of a Northwest Coast form line, but mixed with other references too. One of the things we try to do in this exhibition is to talk about a kind of continuum of innovation that happens within Aboriginal cultures. So even if you think back to, even if we think about glass beading, for example, as being a traditional practice, glass beads were introduced after contact. So it also raises the question of what is traditional and what is contemporary. I think what the artists in this exhibition do is they try to reinvent tradition within the framework of our contemporary society. A lot of what we've seen in the Native hip-hop community throughout Canada is young musicians and artists like rapping in Native dialects that in some cases are only spoken fluently by a few people. So it's a way of reinventing a language for a new generation of speakers. And there is a kind of political and cultural imperative behind that. And I think the same is true for many of the artists in this exhibition who are taking up the form of contemporary culture, but really using it to make tradition new again, to make it relevant to their lived experience.
Persona through this regalia of this very, very kind of warrior woman. And so it's also important in talking about that continuum. The button blanket you'll see in lots of West Coast tradition often includes a family crest, clan on the back. And the wool melton is an introduced material. So again, we see this, what has sort of become a traditional aesthetic and has cultural value, is also this form of adaptation and innovation. And so Skeena's gone now, she's gone and worked with that again and created this as her own emblematic sort of plan in this persona. This mask over in the corner is also part of this regalia. In a way, Skeena in her performance dons this mask, which is carved by Corey Bulpett, who's also in the exhibition in other forms, and we'll talk about his work. But it's a mask of the Godfather, and it echoes a moment in Hollywood where Marlon Brando is nominated for and wins the Academy Award. And instead of accepting the award, he has a woman, a Lakota woman, Sasheen Littlefeather, go up and say that Marlon Brando is not going to accept the award based on treatment and stereotype and racism in Hollywood in the portrayal of Native American people. And so this mask is sort of emblematic of that moment and of those continuing stereotypes and racism in media.
This is work by Bear Witness.
The notion that kind of Indigenous peoples kind of only exist in reserve settings is actually a manifestation of colonialism, right? Where the colonial structure, both here in Canada and in the U.S., created reserves and reservations as a way to remove our ancestors and our families from our traditional territories, right? This is, kind of what many of us would call settler colonialism, where you actually remove Indigenous peoples, take their land, and then appropriate their stories. So by working, our peoples have always migrated across time and space, and if a city's there, from the beginning of cities in North America, Indigenous peoples have been there. There's an interesting project by a research project by a historian that teaches in British Columbia, looking at Indigenous peoples in London and the relationships between colonial centers in Europe and Indigenous peoples. Here in North America, you have Indigenous peoples always kind of being in cities, from Haudenosaunee steel workers being integral to the building of buildings, in Quebec and New York, in that area, to in the States, the Indian Relocation Act, which actually physically moved Indigenous peoples from reserves to cities as a way to both kind of detribalize them and as a way to somehow remove them from their traditional territories and their traditional ways. So the project, as you mentioned, is about demonstrating that here in cities, Indigenous peoples have been here, we are here, we're engaged in conversations. And the bicycle, the lowrider culture is about moving through space, but slowing it down, right? And so with the lowrider bike, it's about operating and reclaiming and kind of decolonizing space by moving slowly through it in these pimped out, fresh lowrider bicycles.